What a good Sunday to everybody. Hope you're doing well. And now I want to turn to the Gospel of Matthew today and continuing our series through Matthew. Today going to be picking up in Matthew 14 and in verse 22 if you want to follow along with me, or you can just listen along and we'll share in God's Word together. We want to continue to look at what Jesus did, looking at His life, His miracles, His work, His teachings. We've been studying through, for a while now, the Gospels. Right now we've been studying through Matthew, and really enjoy these studies together, sharing in these videos. I hope they're helping you, hope they're encouraging, beneficial to you, and just look forward to keeping these going, and look forward to this study from Matthew with you. So Matthew 14, if you want to turn to Matthew 14 and verse 22, really picking up in our, where we left off is the last thing that happened in this chapter. Really in chapter 14, John the Baptist had been killed, and then, Herod was thinking that, Jesus might be John the Baptist raised from the dead, and then Jesus had heard about that, so Jesus went away by himself. He withdrew in a boat to a desolate place, but then we saw that the crowds found out about it. They found out about where Jesus was, and so they go to find him, and they do, and Jesus has compassion on them. He continues to, he starts to heal them. There, as we saw, in verse 14, 14, that he had compassion on them and healed their sick. But then it was getting to evening. They needed to, basically it was getting late. People needed to eat. The disciples, said to Jesus, we should probably let the people go so they can go home, they can go into the villages, get something to eat. Jesus said, you feed them. The disciples said, all we have is, 2 fish and 5 loaves. And so Jesus performs that awesome miracle of feeding 5,000 plus people, a lot of people, and he miraculously did so with only 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. And what a wonderful thing to see, again, continuing to show his power, who he is, the Son of God, the Messiah, the Christ. And it's there we pick up today that after he had done that, in verse 22, that immediately, and today I'm going to be reading from the English Standard Version, which says that immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him, go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. So, nothing, nothing new. He decided that he needed to, dismiss the crowds. So he went ahead, sent the disciples ahead, figured they could get a head start, traveled on. Well, after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. So Jesus goes by himself, secluded place. He spends more time in prayer with the Father. When evening had come, he was there alone. But by this time, verse 24, the boat that the disciples were in was a long way from the land, we are told, and it was being beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. So the disciples have gone out, they're a long way from land, and, it's storming. The waves are bad, wind's bad. They're just being beaten up out there. Would be a very scary situation, which they found themselves in quite a few times. That really, I've heard that it was a common thing for the seas over there, for this particular sea, and it's a common thing for it to be very windy, stormy, the waves to be bad. And here, they're not doing so good. And so, but we're told, verse 25, in Matthew's account here of this, we're actually told that in the 4th watch of the night, that Jesus came to them. Jesus came, but how did he come to them? That's the thing. That's what's amazing here in this account, is Jesus didn't come in another boat. Jesus didn't come in a jet ski. Jesus didn't parachute out of a plane. He didn't swim, even. What we're told is that Jesus came to them walking on the sea, walking on the water, which is physically impossible. So definitely a miracle indeed. But when this is somewhat humorous, but I don't blame them. When the disciples saw Jesus walking on the sea, they were terrified, and they said, "It's a ghost! It's a ghost!" And so they cried out in fear. I mean, they had never seen anybody walk on water. Again, that's just not humanly possible. No human has ever, nor will ever, walk on the water of his own accord. And here is Jesus doing it. They thought it was a spirit. They thought it was a ghost. They're afraid. They're crying out in fear. But immediately, Jesus speaks to them saying, "Take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid." I mean, that would have been amazing to hear, to see, but then it would have been very just shocking. Like, what do you mean? This is Jesus. How's he walking on water? In which by this time they certainly should have known and understood Jesus could do anything. So Jesus tells them, "Don't worry, don't be afraid, it's just me." Well, Peter then says, here's where Peter steps up and really, shows his faith. As, if you will, as maybe sometimes temporary, his great feats of faith were, still, credit to Peter for his great faith, as we'll see here. That Peter answered Jesus and said, "Lord, if it is you, then command me to come to you on the water." So Peter, just sort of to test, to challenge, I don't know why he wanted to test this, to see if it really was Jesus. But he does, and he says, if it's really you, then command me to come to you on the water. So Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. I don't know how far. I don't believe it says how far Jesus was from the boat. And it really doesn't matter, ultimately. But think about that for a minute. I mean, Peter, he swung his leg over the side of the boat, or climbed down, whatever he did. He set one foot on the water, and then another foot, and he didn't sink, and then he lets go of the boat, and then he takes one step, and then another, and he walks on water. Jesus walked on water, but he wasn't alone. Because by faith in Jesus and by the power of God, Jesus made it possible for Peter to walk on the water. And Peter walked to Jesus. Now, that is some awesome faith. And you notice, nobody else did that. None of the other disciples were saying, "Hey, I'll come, I want to do it. Hey, I want to try this." No, Peter was the only one brave enough, the only one who had the faith enough to step out of that boat at this time. And so he did, and he walked on the water. Now we know what happens next, and if you don't, here it is. That unfortunately, as great as that faith was, it didn't last as long as it should have. And by that, we'll see what happens here and what Jesus says. In verse 30, "But when Peter saw the wind," when he saw how bad things were, when he saw how strong the wind was, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me!" And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him and said, "Oh, Peter, good job. That was really close, and I'm really proud of you. Hey, good job." Well, no, actually, if you're reading along with me, you'll know that's not what he said. And if you're listening and maybe you remember that, that's not what Jesus said. And if you don't know, I'll just tell you, no, that's not what Jesus said. I was being sarcastic. Actually, what Jesus says to Peter is, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshiped Jesus, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." I find that fascinating. I find that powerful, that Jesus' response to Peter. Now, I'm not saying that, Jesus was trying to shame Peter, or I'm not saying that, Jesus thought, badly of Peter, but I think it's interesting that, Jesus could have just, Peter showed great faith. He stepped out of the boat, he walked on water, and he was doing good and succeeding. It was happening because of his faith in Jesus and by the power of God. But what happened was Peter took his eyes off of Jesus. He stopped thinking and acting in faith. Instead, he saw the winds and the waves, and he started to instead give in to his fear. And Jesus says to him, he says, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" It's kind of like, Peter, you were doing so good. You had it. But then you gave up. And so Jesus, what he intended to do with Peter in saying that is to really challenge Peter, to further Peter's faith, but to get Peter to realize that if he wouldn't quit on his faith, if he would continue to trust in God, Peter could have made it all the way to Jesus, put his arm around Jesus, walked back to the boat with Jesus. But partway through, he lost his faith and gave in to fear. And so Jesus says to him, basically, I think that's what Jesus meant by this, is Peter, you let your faith go. You had the faith and it was working in you, but it only lasted a little while. You doubted, and that's when you began to fall. But Jesus grabs him, saves him from the water. They get into the boat, the winds cease. And of course, those in the boat, everybody worships Jesus and says, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Which is why Jesus did that, which is why Jesus was doing these miracles, was to get them to see and understand who he is. Feeding the 5,000 plus people, walking on water, healing people, casting out demons. It was meant to show them that he is Jesus, the Son of God, and he is the Messiah, and that his words are true, and that they can have faith in him and trust in him. And it's what we need to learn today too, why we have these miracles and things recorded for us, to know Jesus, know he's the Son of God, know the power of God, know that his word is true. And I think this is a good example to us as well about our own faith today. That there's going to be some winds and waves and things that can get pretty scary in this life. But folks, we can walk on water. And I don't mean that literally. But we can walk on water in the sense that we can get through this life. We can overcome whatever challenges. We don't have to be afraid. And I think of Jesus' words in Luke 18, I believe it was, when, Jesus said, will the Son of Man, when he comes, will he find faith on earth? Or is he going to say to us, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Don't let the things of this life cause you to be in so much fear that it paralyzes you, that it hinders you, that it makes you quit living. I know there's challenges in life. I know right now we've got a lot of things going on. I know there's some scary things, but I think this fits. Is don't get so caught up looking at the winds and the waves that you take your eyes off of Jesus. Have faith and trust in God and walk on water. And don't sink, don't give in to this life, don't give in to the challenges, don't give in to the fears, but trust in God. And then we'll go ahead and finish this chapter out, verses 34 through 36, when they had finally finished crossing over and they came to the land at Gennesaret, if that's how you say that, I have no idea. And when the men of that place recognized Jesus, they sent around all that region and brought to him all who were sick and implored him that they might only touch the fringe of his garment. And as many as touched it were made well. The awesome power of God. And this is how people should have been reacting to Jesus. Jesus comes to this place. They recognize him. They've either already seen what he's done or heard what he's done, and they say, we need Jesus. We need to get our sick to him now. And they also believe that if they could just touch the edge of his garment, that they would be healed, and they did. As many as touched it, just his clothes, were made well by the power of God and their faith in him. So folks, we need to have that same faith in God and Jesus, our Savior, and the power of God, trusting in God, relying on God, growing in faith. These are the things we need to see and hear and fill our hearts and minds with. Remember who Jesus is, remember who God is, and remember what God will do for us and in us and through us, and that everything's going to be okay. Because we have God on our side. And ultimately we have a home with God in heaven. And what a beautiful thing to see people show such faith in Jesus. They had great faith in Jesus. Peter had great faith for a moment, at least in this situation of the walking on water, but it didn't last as long as it should have. So let's make sure that we're growing in our faith and that our faith in God is not wavering or being hindered or anything, but that it is thriving and continuing in the Lord. Have faith. Be encouraged. Trust in the Lord. Put your faith in him. God bless.